Hello everyone. It's been a little while, hasn't it? As most of you probably know by now, I have this series where at the end of each month I go through every film that I watched from that month and give my rough thoughts on each of those films in a very condensed manner. Um, and for the sake of September, I'm just going to let you in on something now. I didn't watch as many films as I have done in, say, August or July, and that's purely because I've had a lot going on in both my personal life and at work, which means I just haven't had the time to watch as many films as I usually do. However, in the 8 films that I have watched, there is still quite a bit of diversity. So, without any further ado, you know the deal by now. Let's get straight into it with the first film. So, I started September off with Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. This was a very pleasant surprise, purely because I had no idea who Shang-Chi was as a character before going into this movie. I like to think I know quite a few of the Marvel characters and I know my Marvel stuff pretty well, but I genuinely had never heard of the character of Shang-Chi. And thankfully, this movie made me want to see more of him after this film had finished because I thoroughly enjoyed what I saw, and I think half of that enjoyment came down to the fact that it didn't feel like a typical MCU Marvel movie. If anything, it felt like a very traditional martial arts film that just so happened to have Marvel elements in it every now and then. And that was a really nice change of pace. And I think it was also a very welcome change considering that, in my opinion, Marvel's output of stuff this year has been a bit lackluster. Maybe outside of Loki and the What If series, everything else I've not really found that entertaining. However, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings is the first thing they've done this year that I can legitimately say is great. Like I said, I love Loki and I'm really enjoying the What If series, but Shang-Chi is a legitimately great MCU movie. After that, I then watched this little independent movie that you may or may not have heard of called Dramarama, and I'm going to be very surprised if this doesn't make my best of the year list when we get to January because I enjoyed this movie so much. There is so much to enjoy about this film. For those of you that maybe haven't heard of this film, I will give you a very quick rundown of it. Basically, a group of friends who are all high school drama students all get together for this murder mystery party that one of them has put on before they all go their separate ways, leaving for university. There is also this other thing that is addressed whereby one of the characters, Jean, is this closeted homosexual, but unfortunately, the school that they go to is heavily Catholic, and a lot of his friends in that group are heavily Catholic, so he doesn't know when the right time is to come out to his friends before they all leave for university. And the end result of this film is something that is very heartfelt, very emotional, but also very just genuinely entertaining, and also really well written and is legitimately quite funny. I think this is probably one of the funniest films I've seen this year, so at least so far anyway. There's really a lot to like about this movie, whether it's the messages that it has or the heartfelt relationship between these friends. It genuinely feels very real and very authentic, and you definitely believe that these are a bunch of drama students because of how over dramatic they can make things and how instantly they click with one another. Genuinely, in terms of the tone and the feel of the movie, this feels like the best John Hughes film that John Hughes never made. After that, I then watched the Netflix movie Worth, starring Michael Keaton and Stanley Tucci, which follows the lawyer who had the very difficult job of having to tally up and somehow figure out how much money needed to be distributed amongst the families who had lost loved ones on 9/11. I genuinely didn't know anything about this side of 9/11, and now that I've watched this film, I found it very fascinating just how it unfolded, uh, the difficult job the lawyer and his company had to do, but also how at first it was kind of butchered and the families of loved ones were kind of treated and how they treated him. All of it is very fascinating. In terms of the movie itself, it is rather by the numbers, but to be honest, I wasn't really expecting anything mind blowing with how it was presented. And to be honest, I think it gets the job done very well. The thing that carries this movie, without a doubt, are the performances, especially from Michael Keaton and Stanley Tucci. Their chemistry, whenever they have scenes together, is very engaging and electric, and you are engaged every single time they're on screen together. But even the moments outside of that, it is a very fascinating sort of film. And again, there isn't really much I can say about this movie because, again, once you know that initial premise, it kind of just writes itself, and it is genuinely just fascinating just finding out how this evolved over time. Um, and yeah, outside of that, it's a very good movie that's decently directed, decently well shot, but the acting and just the core concept of this film and what it delves into are by far the most interesting aspects of this film. Then after that, I watched the film Gunpowder Milkshake, which I think was released in the US a couple months ago, but has only just found its way to the UK. Which I find very strange considering there are quite a few British actors in this film, so you would have thought it would have come out earlier in this country. But that's besides the point. Again, another film that I didn't quite know what I was getting myself in for, but ended up somewhat enjoying it. I don't think it's a perfect film by any means. Um, and when you compare it to the films that it is very, very heavily influenced by, such as Atomic Blonde and John Wick, it's nowhere near as good as those movies. And you can tell at times it is trying too hard to be like those films. But that being said, when it starts to do its own thing and be creative with the premise that it is given itself, it genuinely comes into its own and is genuinely quite entertaining. Especially one fight scene in a corridor where Karen Gillan's character has no control over her arms. It was very funny, it was very well done, and I genuinely wanted to see more stuff like that. But unfortunately, the majority of the movie just feels like it's trying too hard to be like the films it is obviously influenced by, which isn't a problem, I just wish it did more of its own thing. After that, I then watched Brad Bird's The Iron Giant for the very first time. And even though I don't have much to say about it, I am very glad I've finally got a chance to watch it because, in almost every single way, this feels like the perfect Spielberg film that he would have made in the 80s that he didn't make. It genuinely, in almost every single way, feels like an 80s Spielberg film. And I mean that in the best way possible. The animation still holds up incredibly well, and that blend of 2D animation for the majority of the film and that 3D animation for the Iron Giant himself still holds up and complements each other perfectly, especially considering the style, like the very precise style that the film is going for. I think this film was an utter blast, and that ending really still hits emotionally. Um, yeah, it's just a really good film. After that, I then did my only rewatch of the month, which was Moonlight. This film is still gorgeous. I've never really talked about this film on my channel, which is weird because I thought I had, but apparently not. But yeah, this film is masterful in almost every single sense, whether it's the camera work, the acting, the lighting, the specific choices for pretty much every single scene. Not a single thing in this movie is out of place. Not a single thing in this movie is done half-assed. Everything in this film is done with a specific reason or intent behind it. And the fact that there is so much to unpack from this film, no matter how many times you watch it, I still keep finding new things to appreciate and unpack about this film in terms of its themes and meanings. If you've not seen Moonlight by now, you really are missing out because this is one of those films of the last couple years that really deserved that Best Picture win. especially compared to something like, I don't know, Green Book. And then I finally was able to watch David Lowery's The Green Knight. Now, for those of you that don't know, or maybe don't live in the UK, we've been waiting for this film for quite some time. Uh, the US got it back in like, I think, June or July, and the rave reviews it was getting was just making us over in the UK want it even more. But we went for months not knowing if we'd even get it at all this year. And then, lo and behold, they dropped it on Amazon and in cinemas on the same day. And I'm going to be honest, I went into this film wanting to love it. And there is a lot to appreciate about this film. Dev Patel is incredible, the cinematography is gorgeous, along with the set design. Um, and just the overall atmosphere and feel of this movie is incredibly unique. The best way I can describe it is a medieval version of Blade Runner 2049. That is the best way I can sum up the feel and tone and style of this movie. But yet again, it feels very much like its own thing as well. And as much as I admire the way it's shot, the way it's presented, the score, the sound design, the acting, as much as I admire all those things, there's something about the film that holds it back from me saying it's a straight up masterpiece. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed what I was watching as I was watching it. And the final act alone is genuinely brilliant, in my opinion. And that's not to say everything before that isn't brilliant, it is very well made. But I feel like this is one of those films that I can appreciate more than I actually like it. Um, which is something I can't say about Blade Runner 2049 because I love that film and also appreciate it from a filmmaking standpoint as well. The Green Knight, whereas the Green Knight, as much as I like a lot of the aspects in it, I appreciate it more as a film than I do actually straight up enjoying it. And finally, the last film that I watched in September, again, I told you I didn't watch much this month, was Limbo, which is a independent British film. Is also a directorial debut for director Ben Sharrock, I think his name is. I'd heard a lot about this film. The fact that it got a lot of praise at last year's London Film Festival, and when it was released in cinemas earlier this year, again, a lot of people were really praising it. I went into this movie sort of blind because apart from the reviews that I'd seen for the film, I genuinely didn't know what to expect. And what I ended up getting was almost like a low budget British equivalent of like a Wes Anderson film, but nowhere near as overboard with its style. This film is genuinely really damn good, and again, is probably going to be one of those films that will end up on my best of the year list. It's got a great sense of humor that takes a while to fully kind of appreciate because at first you're kind of still trying to figure out what the film's going for. But once you know what type of humor it's going for, which in the case of this film is very deadpan and very dry, if you know what you're getting into in terms of the humor from the word go, then you can definitely appreciate it a lot more. And once I figured out that's the kind of humor it was going for, I found this movie absolutely hilarious. But this film also does a very difficult job of balancing that sort of humor, but also with a lot of tender and genuine drama and emotion. Because when you realize, or when you know that this film is about immigration, um, and specifically from an immigrant's point of view, you start to think to yourself, how can you make that sort of scenario both funny and relatable, but also very dramatic and cathartic in terms of an emotional resonance. But when you watch this film, you were able to see that apparently you can do both. So guys, that is everything that I watched in September. I told you it wasn't that much. Um, if you like the video, then give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Remember to check out my Twitter and my Letterboxd if you haven't done so already either. And I will see you all in the next one. Bye.